A few years back, I was singing the praises of Vault Comics. They were delivering some of the best stories on the market, definitely genre specific, a lot of horror kind of stuff, but I couldn't recommend them high enough. In my opinion, just 3 or 4 short years ago, Vault Comics was pound for pound the best publisher in all of comic books. We had great stories like The Plot, we had The Rush, recently we've had Barbaric, the best story I think Vault ever released, These Savage Shores. Some really good stuff has come out of Vault, but they've never really gotten bigger, and I was very surprised to see this headline on the Hollywood Reporter talking about how they sold 137,000 copies of a #1 issue that's about to be released. I went and read the article, and there's some stuff behind this that really lends credence to a couple of conversations I've had within the past couple weeks talking about you can't really take #1 comic book issue sales, even on the indie market, really at face value, because there's so many things that are happening to really boost those #1 issue sales. This one's very interesting. We also have some comments from the CEO and publisher of Vault Comics, Damian Vossel. And I think he's on the right track, but I think he misses a couple of things here. But it's a really interesting thing that's going on. Let's talk about how they got to 137,000 sales, or orders at least, for a Vault Comics issue #1. Vault Comics has disrupted the natural comic book order and set a company milestone. The company announced Thursday that orders for its upcoming comic Unnatural Order #1 exceeded 137,000, making it the best-selling comic ever for the growing independent publisher and one of the top ordered indies of 2023, if not the decade. I don't know what they mean by top selling. If we're going to the top 10, I don't think that the 137,000 orders even comes close to cracking the top 10 in indie comics. If you're saying maybe one of the top 50 order comic books of the last decade, maybe you're in the right ballpark there. I think this would probably get up there. But there have been some very, very high-selling #1 issues on the independent comic book scene over the past decade. Let's not forget about Berserker, 650,000. I think a lot of those Spawn issues from Todd McFarlane that released within the last 3 years, those were over 500,000. TMNT, The Last Ronin, I think that was over 180,000. So there's some really high-selling comic books out there, but 137,000 is an absolutely astronomical number for any indie publisher, especially Vault Comics, because they are so niched down when it comes to the genres that they're doing. A lot of their stuff just quite frankly doesn't play to a bigger audience. It plays to a specific audience that tends to go a little bit smaller than some of these other comic books that have really broken out, over the past decade. Spawn notwithstanding, although that is Todd McFarlane, a superhero comic book artist doing a horror-based superhero comic book, and certainly breaking the record for most indie comic books published in a row, going well over 300, also helped out the visibility of Spawn. So this is a huge number, but there's something going on here that isn't quite right. You know it, I know it, it's in the article. The milestone does come with an asterisk. The comic was offered for free to retailers, giving them little risk but plenty of reward. The issue retains its $4.99 suggested retail price, enabling the gigantic launch to be a potential financial windfall for comic book retailers who can sell it or give it away for free, and it establishes a potential new model for launching titles in the comic book direct market. I appreciate that the Hollywood Reporter are covering this story, but that last line there is absolutely ridiculous. Your #1 comic book issue for basically any book in 2023, because of the way that the speculator market is working right now and the way that the reader market is working within comic books, the ecosystem that's happening, is going to be your best-selling issue, not just a little bit, but by a mile. Your #2 issue will likely drop at least 1/3 down from the #1 issue, and they're not actually making any money off this #1 issue because they're giving it away to retailers, obviously in the hopes that retailers realize, hey, I can make a whole lot of money on this because I got it for free. It has a $5 cover price. If I really push it to my customers, I'm making all the profit on this one. I imagine retailers only had to pay for the shipping cost associated with ordering Unnatural Order #1 from Vault Comics. And I think that's a cool idea. It's interesting, but I don't believe it's actually sustainable. Certainly not for a lot of these bigger publishers who have a bottom line, who have investors that they have to answer to where why aren't you making money on the best-selling, or at least the best ordered comic book in the history of the comic book publisher? Fortunately for Vault, what makes them kind of unique is that the Vossel brothers own the company, and I believe it's funded by their father. I haven't read up on Vault in a few years. I might be a little bit wrong, but I believe it's two brothers that just really love comic books, and have the means to be able to be comic book publishers. Like they're not doing this because they have to, is the way I understand. And I think that's cool that they get to take this kind of risk. And hey, who knows, if this thing blows up and retailers are actually able to push it really hard and make this thing a perennial top-selling comic book in today's market, you know, cracking the top 20 every month for a year straight, then it will all have been worth it, right? Because now you have a sustainable property that has word of mouth that is really sustaining itself, and retailers are obviously going to keep ordering it because they're not going to give the next issue away for free. It's only the first issue, but we haven't actually ever seen this before, so we don't know that it's going to work. And one of the interesting things about the article is there really isn't much information regarding the comic book itself other than the creative team. You know, Christopher Yost is on it, and just a little blurb about the story, which I think was an enormous missed opportunity on the part of Vault Comics. Mostly it's just them patting their own backs and talking about how amazing it is that they got 137,000 orders, but they never really talk about the story. There's only this little blurb. In ancient Britain, an unstoppable evil, only known as the Druid, plunges the world into an age of horror, fire, and sacrifice. But there is one man even the Druid fears, a soldier from another time, who alone knows the Druid's secret. This is not how the world is supposed to be. That is all the information we get regarding the contents of the comic book and why you should buy it, i.e. the actual story. You know, I kind of went out there and I looked at some of the covers. I was able to find 5 different covers that are associated with it. And 3 of them 100% look like horror comic books. One of them looks like a sci-fi adventure comic book, and one of them looks like a love story. And just kind of the pages that I've seen that have been released and what they're saying here, it sounds like it's a historical fiction, horror, fantasy comic book. And you're really niched down at that point. I don't know that this is really going to appeal to an enormous audience. Are there actually 137,000 comic book readers that are interested in a story that's that niche down, that genre specific? Me personally, I'm one of those. I read a lot of historical fiction. I think historical fiction is a lot of fun, and I especially like hearing about Romans. So this is right up, you know, my alley. And I certainly like horror, and I do love fantasy. So you're talking about all the things that work for me as a potential customer, but I don't normally actually consume that in comic books. There have been historical fiction comic books that I have read and I've really enjoyed. Britannia from Valiant Comics back in the day, I really enjoyed that series. So this is something that I will absolutely consume. I will definitely check out the first issue if I can get a hold of it or some type of copy. But I don't know that this really appeals to a mass market. Now, potentially it does. I don't know the exact contents of the story. It might be a little bit different than I perceive just on the information available in the covers. And Christopher Yost is the writer. You know, and he had some success back in the day at Marvel Comics. I believe he created X-23. He also worked at Marvel Animation. He's worked on The Mandalorian. He's worked on some other stuff. He kind of went to Hollywood and is coming back. And I imagine Vault Comics is paying him a lot of money. But I don't even know, is Christopher Yost a name? Is it a draw for comic book readers anymore? Do people even remember him? It's not like bringing Mark Miller back or somebody like that. It's not bringing Joe Mad back from video games, where that guy was just like a superstar for an entire generation of comic book readers. So we shall see. I thought the comments from Vault CEO publisher Damian Vossel were very interesting, and I think he may have misread this just a little bit. But these are only my opinions. Obviously, I'm not behind the scenes, and I don't know the exact business strategy that they're going for here. Anyone who works in comics knows that new series live or die by their orders on issue number 2, number 3, and so on. The best way to get readers to show up in droves for a second issue is to make sure you got the first issue into as many hands as humanly possible. Traditionally, that's not easy. You have to start with a great book from a great team. You have to market the heck out of it. You have to get retailers to rally around you, and then you hope you get lucky. And he certainly has some really good points as somebody in the industry. He would know better than I do, that if you see that dramatic drop from issue number 2 to 3, and then an even bigger drop to issue number 3, and then to 4 and everything, then you're in trouble. There might not be staying power for your comic book series. And if they can get Unnatural Order into the hands of 137,000 people, I think it'll be an enormous success. And they certainly have given retailers a reason to rally around the comic book because they're bringing in all the profits. But it's still a $5 issue number 1 on a property no one's ever heard of. I just think that's an impediment. That is a barrier to entry for people to go buy that comic book. Why am I going to spend $5 on Unnatural Order number 1 when I could go spend $5 on Nightwing, a character that I know and love, and maybe I'm comfortable with what Tom Taylor's doing with the character? Or why don't I just spend $5 on Moon Knight or whatever? I think going with the $5 price point that a lot of comic books are being sold for nowadays really does this comic book no favor. Now, obviously, the retailers, if they would like, can sell it below cover price, but even at that point, you're almost devaluing the brand before it even kicks off. I would have thrown a $2.99 suggested retailer price on that cover. The retailers are still going to make a whole lot of money, and you're giving so many people an opportunity or a reason to go in and jump on a #1 issue, especially when you can control it like that. It's not like Vault Comics is trying to make bank with this #1 issue. They're trying to get exposure, and I think the smartest thing to do probably would have been to drop that $4.99 cover price, drop it down to $2.99, and we know like the price point can really make a difference in comic books. If you look at sales on Spawn, as it was leading up to issue number 300 when Todd McFarlane broke the record, it kind of bottomed out at about 11,000 orders a month. It really wasn't doing very well. And then next thing you know, Spawn is the only comic book on the market really written and aimed towards adults that's $2.99. DC had gone up, Marvel had gone up, the entire rest of the industry, including everything else at Image Comics, had gone up to $3.99 and in some cases $4.99. And Spawn is sitting there at $2.99, and all of a sudden it feels like a deal, and you saw this steady climb. All of a sudden, people were taking notice, and they were buying the comic book, and I think the price really had something to do with that. So I think that was a bit of a missed opportunity. I feel like he read the industry wrong when he said this quote: "The results have exceeded even our most optimistic thinking. The numbers are a little staggering. They blow Free Comic Book Day numbers out of the water. They set this series up to have one of the biggest readerships of any independent book in the market. It's an incredible position to be in." I don't know, man. It's a free comic book where the retailers take in like all the profits with it. I'm surprised they didn't order it heavier. There aren't #1 issues that are coming out from any publisher in North America where the retailer makes all the profits. Why wouldn't you order 1,000 of these and hope that you could sell them all, Even if you sold them all for a quarter, you're making profit on every single one of them, obviously other than the shipping, but that would make up for it. Like, I'm a little bit surprised it was as low as 137,000. That is a great number, and that's a huge order. But when you take into account that none of the retailers involved in this are taking on any risk whatsoever, I'm a little bit surprised they didn't order heavier, but they should be happy. And certainly, I will give them this. Even if I would have made the cover price $2.99 instead of $4.99, just to remove a barrier for entry, to remove an obstacle for new readers to jump onto something that they've never read before. And I think a lot of comic book readers nowadays don't really remember Christopher Yost. Or if they did, they don't remember why they remember him. He wasn't that impactful. That isn't really a marquee name there. So I would have done that differently, but it has the opportunity. There's a chance for Unnatural Order to find a bigger regular audience than really anything that's debuted in indie comic books for the last 5 years. Because they've done something different. They've incentivized the retailers to be our partner. Go out there, get the word out. Please sell this any way that you can because you're getting all the profits and we want that readership. And now you've incentivized the boots that are on the ground that are going to be actually interacting with your potential customers to go out there and be your evangelist. So I do think this is a pretty smart risk on the part of Vault Comics. I hope that it works out. I hope this is the book that they should do it with. And this is really something that breaks out beyond just genres, which is kind of what Vault Comics has been known for. They're not quite what they were like 3 or 4 years ago, but once you have a good series or two, next thing you know, instead of having like the hottest young horror talent in the entire industry making their name at Vault Comics, next thing you know, it's like, we've got Tim Seeley in because we wanted to bring in the guy that failed at Marvel and DC, but he's a Marvel and DC guy. And, they kind of watered their brand down and they're not quite as hot as they used to be. But hey, this might put them on the map, but it's also another really good example of why the argument against what Mark Millar was saying a few weeks ago on the channel. They're like, look at all these sales on #1 issues, but look at all the ways that you can fudge those numbers. Look at all the ways that you can manipulate sales on #1 issues. Hell, we have a publisher right now that didn't even charge retailers to order the damn book. And that's why you really can't take those as being all that important. It's sales on issues number 4, 5, 6. It's longevity and really finding an audience that's really important. I kind of broke it all down why sales charts aren't all that important when it comes to saving comic books, because Heidi McDonald's a moron. There's also a link in the video description.